Hey there, and welcome to MS201 Lesson 05 on the Fundamentals of Leadership. My name is Captain Silver Beatty. I'm an APMS with the University of Montana Grizzly Battalion, and I'm going to be taking you through this lesson today. Now, to start off with, feel free to, if you can, go ahead and scan that QR code. That's going to take you to a live updated version of this exact same presentation, just more so on a website. Now, on top of that, once you go through that, you can do it at your own pace. There's also going to be some embedded links that you'd be able to click on to take you to some resources that give you a little bit more in-depth learning, a little bit more information on the concepts that we're going to talk about today. Now, depending on when you're watching this was recorded in October of 2024. So this lesson that you're about to watch is built on that school year's curriculum. Things may have changed. There may have been some updates. So that website version of this through the QR code is going to be a more updated version, or the most up-to-date, most likely. And with that, I also encourage you to have a piece of paper, maybe a pen or a pencil out that you can jot some notes on, or even just have a Word doc open off to the side that you can type some notes out, because there is quite a bit of information in this that you're going to want to hold on to and be able to study later, potentially for some future exams, midterms, finals, however your cadre is going to use this information. So like I said, there is a little bit more information in this. This particular slide, if you had the website version open, is going to take you to the Fundamentals of Leadership read ahead. You could click right here on this link if you have it open on your phone, or you could click right here for a student handout as well. So let's just dive right into this. Now, when you see things titled Think About It, I want you to actually take a moment, pause the video, do some self-reflection, come up with your own answers for a lot of these questions, because this particular lesson is really going to dive deep into, like it says, the fundamentals of leadership. And in order to really capture these concepts at a deeper level for yourself and help them really embed into your brain, it's important that you think about your past experiences and your own opinions when it comes to leadership itself. So some of the questions that we're going to start off with that I want you to think about: how did someone, maybe a leader, a coach, an old supervisor at a job, maybe a former teacher in high school, how did someone that you knew in the past actually motivate you to get things done? When it comes to maybe sports, were they loud or were they more of a quiet leader? Did they have to really push you, or did they bring it back a little bit? Now, could you or would you actually aspire to lead people in that same way that motivated you? Why or why not? Now, another thing I want you to think about is, why do we even need leaders? Why do we as a human race need leaders in general? And then bringing this to a military concept, how does the Army define leadership? Now, you've probably seen this definition in the past. We've talked about it in an MS1 curriculum. I've talked about it in a few of my other MS2 videos. But Army leadership is defined as the process of influencing people by providing direction, purpose, and motivation to accomplish a mission and improve the organization. Now, there's a lot that's enveloped in just those three lines there. The big words that I want you to focus on is influence, and then also focus on that purpose, direction, and motivation. Those are three separate things. We provide the purpose, the big picture, the direction, how to get there, and the motivation, how to want to get to that end goal to accomplish both a mission, and then overall we want to improve the organization as a whole, right? So keep that in mind as we talk through this. This is the first of several lessons talking about leadership. This one's going to cover the fundamentals, maybe a couple theories later on. We're going to talk about adaptive leadership. We're also going to move into assessing your own leadership and how to analyze leaders using our Army Leadership Requirements model. So this is kind of your basic lesson that's going to lead into other ones too. So remember those words: influence, purpose, direction, and motivation. So what do you think? What makes a good leader? And with that, what personality traits, if any, actually make people better suited for certain leadership roles? Then even on top of that, what factors actually drive individuals to then take charge, to put themselves in those leadership positions? Now, going even deeper into a military context, why do we as an army need men and women who actually seek and want to lead by example? And then what critical competencies and characteristics might a good leader demonstrate? What do we actually see demonstrated in both their competence and their overall character? I really hope these questions got you thinking overall about your past and what you'd want to see out of leaders, maybe what we think the Army wants to see out of our leadership. And by the end of this lesson, what I hope for is that you can recognize transactional leadership behaviors and then interpret transformational leadership actions. Those are two separate types of leadership. Hopefully then you can analyze this idea of a full range of leadership theories. There's a few that we're going to talk about in this lesson here. I hope you're able to identify them and then analyze when they're more useful and maybe less effective. Then we're going to categorize some managerial attributes of leadership as well. And by the end of this, I hope that you can demonstrate an actual understanding of situational leadership through identifying basic leader behavior styles and the subordinate levels of readiness. Now that's a lot of learning objectives, right? 5 total for this particular lesson. So I hope you have some caffeine. I hope you've got your cup of coffee, maybe your Monster energy drink. I hope you're awake because there's a ton of information in this lesson itself. And with that, if you need to pause this and come back to it later because it's a kind of a huge water faucet drinking out of a fire hose when you're watching this video, feel free to do that. Pause it, come back to it another time because there's several different concepts we're going to cover here. So let's start with this idea of transactional leadership. So first in this lesson, we're going to talk the difference between transactional and transformational. Now, transactional itself, it's motivated by this idea of rewards and punishment, where we reward success and we punish failure. Think of it in terms of like quid pro quo. You do this for me, I do this for you. You do this against me, I'm going to do this against you. It's really motivated by success and failure. Now, in terms of what it's good for, it provides guidance and oversight. It observes and oversees productivity in detail, but it's more of a managing style than what we consider typical leading styles. However, it's common in a lot of organizations, specifically in this one called the U.S. Army. Remember, with transactional leadership, the main focus is on short-term tasks. It really is a short-term style of leadership that doesn't necessarily work for long-term visions. It's a what needs to get done right here, right now. All right, so I want you to think about this. When we think of the term of transactional leadership, why do we think drill sergeants, given what you know about this style, why do you think drill sergeants typically apply those actions that fall under transactional leadership? And outside of drill sergeants and basic training, what other situation do you think this style might be the best option for? Now, with any type of leadership style or theory, there's always going to be advantages and disadvantages. So let's start with the advantages of transactional leadership. Like we said, it's focused on short-term goals, which are attainable. It's very effective in both motivating and encouraging your followers and getting some production out of them. And the followers under this leadership style typically benefit from structure, because then they know exactly what's expected from them by their chain of command. Your followers will expect rewards for success and maybe punishment for failure, which motivates them to succeed, of course, right? It's capable of addressing small operational details very quickly because it's a get this done quick style. Transactional leaders typically handle all of the details and they focus on that task accomplishment. It's very task oriented. And leaders with this style usually keep employees pretty productive on their front line. Of course, there's also disadvantages to this, right? It's not really a valid leadership style that you'd want to use, like I said, for long-term goals or even strategic planning. It's really only applicable for specific task accomplishment. And this style doesn't allow for critical thought. It's just a get this done now. It's more of a management style than a leadership style. There is not much focus on the development of the subordinates themselves. So those are your advantages and disadvantages. Now let's talk transformational leadership. And what does this look like? Well, first, it's very people-focused. People under this transformational theory believe that other people will follow leaders who actually inspire and motivate them. And with that, it then helps mold organizations into one cohesive team. Now, how does it do that? Well, it develops and sells this compelling vision for the future. It develops relationships with the followers. That's what we do as leaders under this leadership style. And then transformational leaders act as a teacher, mentor, and a coach. And then all-encompassing, the focus is really on long-term goals. So a good example of this idea of transformational leadership should be shown by your cadre, right? They're really focused on the cadets. They believe that they will follow, their cadets will follow them if we inspire and we motivate you. We're trying to mold each program into one cohesive team. We use things like commissioning and future Army leadership as this vision for what comes into play and why the lessons that we teach you and the things that we do are important. Most cadre should be developing pretty good relationships with the people that they advise or they're instructing. We know you. We get to know you more as just a cadet in a program or a student in a class. A lot of us truly believe in acting like we're not just a teacher teaching you lessons, we're also your mentor and your life coach, getting you forward to a long-term goal. Now, just like with transactional leadership, of course, there's advantages and disadvantages. So what are some of the advantages of this style? Well, typically, a transformational leader has excellent people skills. We create this enthusiastic work atmosphere, and we drive this organization with different innovations, different out-of-the-box ideas for getting forward. We are self-motivated, and it helps enable higher output and efficiency. Now, this idea also facilitates subordinate leader development. Notice that was one of the big disadvantages to transactional. Transformational is really focused on subordinate development. And under this leadership style, typically followers will actually willingly work hard for that leader. Now, what are some of the disadvantages? Well, the success is limited by the ability of the leader themselves. And we just assume that there's some follower motivation there. Transformational leadership implementation is extremely time-consuming. It takes more mental, emotional, and physical effort. And this theory actually explains the what, but it doesn't necessarily give details on the how. And transformational leadership is very powerful, but it's not always used morally. Now let's think about that last bullet there. Who do we know of that are some notable transformational leaders in our history? Now, you might be thinking of some very positively perceived leaders, but have there been some transformational leaders out there that haven't necessarily been fully moral, or they haven't even been perceived in a positive way? Now, bringing it back to somebody who may have been perceived pretty positively, President Abraham Lincoln, right? Why do you think we consider him a transformational leader? So with that, have you ever experienced different types of leadership? And what have you observed from the best leaders in your life? What about some of the worst leaders? And why should you as a leader be familiar with this idea of different leadership theories or different styles, different ways to lead people? Are there any theories that you're already pretty familiar with? Have you heard of transactional and transformational? Have you heard of servant leadership? Country club leadership, management by exception? Well, we're going to talk about a few more of these theories in just a moment. So this idea right here that I'm going to show you is called the full range leadership model. Now you'll see here before I even pull any additional things up, the idea of this is you're going from this bottom left corner of ineffective or negative leadership quality, moving upwards toward the right of more effective and positive leadership qualities. You'll also see as we plug some numbers in here and names in here that anything on this side is going to be a little bit more passive of a style, where this side, this is more of an active leadership style. So let's start with this idea of laissez-faire. You may have heard this before. It's a French term, kind of basically means let them be. So it's just, you're that kind of leader that's just out there. You can see that we consider this pretty ineffective, the most passive theory that we're going to talk about today. You're just not involved, and you don't have much of an active role in actually leading your people. And then we have this idea of management by exception and management by exception active. So there's a passive version and an active version. One is more just waiting for issues to happen. The next one, you're a little bit more involved and you expect issues to happen, but you really only step in when those bad or negative issues come up. Then we have that idea of transactional leadership that we just talked about. As you can see, again, we're moving upwards towards more effective leadership and more active involvement by the leader. And of course, here on top, then we have this transformational leadership idea. Now, I talked about these three here, laissez-faire, management by exception, both passive and active. And this particular lesson really is focusing on both transactional and transformational. So that's what I want you to know more about. It's good to have an idea of what these two here are, or these three here are, but really focus on the ins and outs and the intricacies between these two, especially the differences and when they're more effective or less effective. So when we think about laissez-faire, how do you think they might exercise their authority? Well, the near avoidance or even absence of leadership is, by definition, the most inactive, passive, as well as the most ineffective style of leadership altogether. In the very extreme, absolutely nothing is transacted between a leader and the follower within this style, which basically means that a laissez-faire leader is rarely ever going to actually exercise their authority. So what's the difference between a leader who's managing by exception, both actively and passively? Well, like I said, the passive leader is really just waiting for deviations, mistakes, and errors to occur, and then takes that corrective action. So they're just sitting back, and if something pops up, then they'll step in and exercise some authority. Whereas the active style of this, they arrange to actively monitor those deviations from standards and mistakes and errors in their followers' assignments. And then again, they take corrective action as necessary. This involves basically just being constantly vigilant of possible mistakes. I consider this really to start kind of being more micromanaging, where it's more actively involved, but you're just waiting. You're essentially just waiting for somebody to mess up. So then when we're talking about going back to the transactional idea, how do you think a transactional leader actually engages his or her subordinates? Well, there are situations where the transactional leader will achieve exactly the performance you expect, and that may be pretty high performance. Thus, it's pretty effective. But if you continue to be purely transactional in the way that we define the leadership style, you'll never actually inspire your followers. You'll never fully develop them. You'll never challenge them to come up with some breakthrough insights. And you'll never embed your highest moral values and standards into their behavior and actions. Again, it's very much a get this done right now style. So with that being said, how do we think transformational leaders engage their subordinates? Well, this person really focuses on, remember those words I told you to remember. They focus on that inspiration. They inspire their followers with challenges and persuasion by providing that meaningful and understanding regarding the actions required. So at the core of this definition, which drives people to achieve a mission, the leader is intellectually stimulating, expanding the followers' use of their abilities to question not only other people's perspectives, but their own, and even at the most deeply rooted set of those values and perspectives. And finally, that leader is individually considerate. They provide their people with that support, mentoring, and coaching. Remember, kind of going back to that idea of the direction, guidance, purpose, that motivation. All of those things that we consider part of the definition of Army leadership really comes into being a transformational leader as well. So let's think about a few of these things here. Why is transactional leadership more effective at accomplishing tasks? And how does transformational leadership actually facilitate that long-term success for an organization? So then why is transformational leadership less effective when we need to do things quickly? We need to make change in an organization very fast. Then I want you to really think about, pause right here, think about an example of a situation where a transactional leader that get things done right now, task focused, when are they the most needed? And there are definitely times when transactional leadership is more effective. All right, so then what are some key differences between this idea of being a leader and being a manager? What do you think the difference is between those two words? Do we think leaders and managers have spheres of power, or do they have spheres of influence? And then maybe thinking about this next question will help answer those first two. How is managing tasks different than actually leading people? Now keep in mind what you know about transactional leadership and transformational leadership and where tasks and people come into play there. So let's talk this idea of managerial grid. This is going to explain just a little bit of what types of management or leadership work when we're concerned about production and when we're concerned about people. So you can see here in this bottom left here, the way this is laid out, this is when we have, in this management style, we have the lowest concern for production and the lowest concern for people. This is impoverished, right? Impoverished is a pretty negative word. It's just nothing there. They don't care about their people and they don't care about the tasks at hand. Now we can move up to an extreme version here, what we call country club management. Now this person, typically you can think of the idea of being a people pleaser. They're very concerned about people, but they're not really concerned about getting things done. This is where you have an environment where it's really fun to come to work maybe, but there's never anything really happening. We have this middle of the road management here, where of course we can see a little bit lower concern for production, a little bit lower concern for people, but it's higher than this impoverished thing. So just kind of right there, we kind of care about the people, we kind of care about getting things done. And then we're over here in this idea of team management and task management. And you can see transactional here on the right, transformational here on the left. Where do they come into play together is this team management here. These particular leaders or managers are very concerned about production and getting things done. They're also very concerned about their people. But we have task management down here on the bottom, where it's a high concern for getting things done, low concern about their people. So where do you think you fall in right here? And where do you want to be seen? What type of manager in this grid do you want to be placed? Okay, so let's talk a little bit deeper about what each of these styles actually mean. So we talked impoverished management, right? They give the minimum amount of effort needed to actually get the required work done. This manager only does what's absolutely necessary to sustain their organization membership. It's pretty indifferent to the work and the people, and it has an approach to evade and elude extra work, as well as any additional interaction with their subordinates. This manager can really see is a lot like that laissez-faire. They're just kind of there, they don't care what gets done, and they don't really care much about their people. The middle of the road really does focus on this idea of balance and compromise. So there's a balance of their people, balance of the production, and then making some compromises where it's okay to not get everything done, and it's also okay not to really focus too much on their people. Country club management, like I said, kind of that people pleaser style, is known to yield and comply. So this leadership style really is more about the thoughtful attention to people's needs, with the hopes of just satisfying their team member relationships. They just want to make their people happy. They just want to be liked. Task management, the key words that describe this are just control and dominate. Don't care about the people, just get this stuff done right here, right now. And this team management, where we want to be, the work accomplishment actually comes from committed people. They believe that. This style is really, it depends on that interdependence through a common stake and purpose among their team members. So they believe that we're all one team here. And it leads to relationships, trust, and respect overall. Another way we can really look at this, if we're impoverished, we're indifferent. Middle of the road, we're pretty much compromising. Country club managers are very accommodating. Task management, dictatorial. And then our team management. This is where we have that perfect score. This is where we want to be. You've got the perfect balance of getting things done and taking care of your people. So let's think about this. Why is it necessary for our leaders to actually adapt to leadership actions in a situation? How does that situation change what actions we take as leaders? And how does this idea of situational leadership integrate leader styles and our subordinate readiness? Now, using those questions, we're going to move into this idea of situational leadership. And what is that? It's a theory based on how people respond to working and being led in groups. So it focuses on two key assumptions. There's this idea of task behavior, which is the amount of guidance and direction that's provided, and relationship behavior, which is how much social and emotional support is provided. And this whole theory proposes that the environment and readiness of our followers helps a leader actually identify what style of leadership they should be applying. So with that, how do you think a leader's behaviors and support of their subordinates, or even a lack thereof, can actually impact organizational performance and expectations? So in other terms, how does a leader's behaviors and actions and how they keep their people supported help an organization? So let's talk about the 4 styles of what we call leader behavior. So there on the left, you're going to see another chart where it's going from low to high on directive behavior, how much the leader is actually directing things. And over here on the left, low to high on how much they're supporting their people. Now these, how you're going to decide if you're directing, coaching, supporting, or delegating, is going to be dependent on the readiness of your followers for the most part. So these are 4 different behaviors that you can show, and you've got to know when you're using these different styles. Now, when we're using directing, we know that this is going to have a low development of our people. This is when we're telling them what they need to do. Coaching, we're moving kind of upwards towards a little bit more development. Coaching is adding a little bit more of a touch to that development, and we're really shooting all the way over here to where we can delegate, and the development of our followers is already pretty high. Now, to take this into an ROTC context, let's look at it like this. Right now, MS1s, they're more being directed. So the MS1 advisors and instructors are really living in that, having to highly direct their people. Now, if you're watching this as an MS2, you've kind of moved into this section here where now your advisor is more of a coach. When you move into MS3, this means that the followers themselves have been developed a little bit more, and now they're being supported. At this point, their advisor is not directing as much as they are just supporting them. Remember that mental and emotional support. And then MS4 year, at this point, hopefully, your advisor or the PMS really doesn't have to direct much and really doesn't have to support much. They've been fully developed. They're at the end of the development phase of this particular organization. So they've hit here. As an MS2, this is where you should be. So then how does that subordinate ability, like what your followers can do, how does that affect our mission preparation and our execution? Think about it in terms of an MS1 doesn't know much, right? Very, very little. So how does that affect your preparation and execution of, say, a sticks lane? Well, a subordinate can't, and they shouldn't, ever be expected to perform actions or missions that they're not capable of executing. So their collective ability impacts both the preparation and execution, right? And that's where it comes into the leading, where we teach and we develop and we get them more comfortable and capable of doing different actions or missions. So then how can the confidence and willingness of our people and our subordinates to actually perform, how can that enhance or even detract from their actual potential to succeed? Well, if an individual is either unable or unwilling to execute any actions, there's almost no reasonable expectation of success, right? If we know somebody can't do it or they just won't, how can we expect them to succeed? However, if they're able, willing, and confident, we can expect a little bit more of a success out of them. So let's talk about another chart here. I know this is a lot of charts and a lot of definitions and ideas, but with this one, we're talking about the subordinate levels of readiness. And I promise you, this is all going to come together. It's all going to make sense soon. Now we're talking about the readiness of our actual followers. This has not much to do with leadership itself. Now we're talking about the people that you're leading. So if they're in an R1 category, their readiness is very low. They're not ready to succeed. They're not ready for certain actions. This one, they're either unable and unwilling or insecure, not confident. So they're unable, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the experience, they're just not capable of doing it. And they're not willing to learn, or they're pretty not confident, right? When they move into this R2 section, which again, is typically about where you should be if you're in MS2, you might not be completely capable, but hopefully you're more willing or confident, okay? Then we move into this R3 where they're able, but maybe they're not willing, or they're just not confident, they're insecure. And the ultimate goal is to get our followers into this R4 category where they're both capable because they have the knowledge and experience and they want to, or they're confident in doing something. Now we talk about ability and willingness. Ability, again, is that idea the person has the actual necessary knowledge, experience, and skills to complete something. Willingness is internal. That person needs to have the necessary confidence, commitment, and motivation to accomplish it. So that's how those definitions play into all of this right here and where we can consider some of our followers to be. Now, how do we know what our follower readiness is? As a leader, we have to know our people. We can't just walk into a room of people we don't know and assume where they land on this scale. Of course, in an ideal world, we all have followers that are R4, but that's just not realistic. You usually have multiple people amongst these entire categories here. But if you're watching this as an MS2, you're already here. You're watching a video, so you're willing to do the work. You just might not have the knowledge. And always remember that your follower readiness can change, just like your own leadership behavior can change. We can get people to this section here. All right, so think about this. Why is understanding those levels of readiness actually critical for you as a leader? Because you need to have your thumb on the pulse of that organization as a whole and at the organizational level to actually be able to implement those motivational triggers that get people to want to perform. You have to be able to implement the motivation. So knowing where they are then puts pressure on you and the expectation on you to get them built up. Let's pull this all together right here. In situational leadership itself, we now have some color coding here, right? So if they're in this R1, unable or unwilling, they're going to be more in this directive. This is how you are going to treat them or be as their leader. If they're unable, but they're willing and confident, well, then you're going to be more of a coach. If they're able, but unwilling or insecure, this is where you need to support them. You don't have to direct. They already know what to do. We just need to support them in being confident or willing to get there. And then once they've hit this R4 level, they're able and confident. You don't have to give a lot of direction and you don't have to give a lot of support. They're there. Now you're just delegating. And this is typically, if we're going from this S1 with an R1 readiness, we're sitting at an S1 as the leader. This is where our goal is. We're hoping to follow this into delegation. All right, that was a ton of information. I hope you got some stuff out of this. I hope some of it starts to make a little bit of sense. We're going to use a lot of these concepts as we move through more leadership style videos, but hopefully now you're able to actually recognize that transactional leadership and the behaviors that come with it. Remember, that's that quid pro quo, task-focused, get this done now style. I also hope you're able to interpret some of those transformational leadership actions. Remember, they sell that long-term, compelling vision. They're people-focused. They know that there's going to be more effort and time, but the development of their subordinates is most important. Now, I hope you can also kind of look at that full range of leadership theories. Remember, laissez-faire, management by exception, moving into transactional and transformational. And then I hope you're able to categorize those managerial attributes. Remember, are they more focused or concerned about production? Are they more concerned about their people? Do they have a healthy balance of both? And where do they land depending on that concern? And then now that we've been able to bring all that situational leadership into play and how it's important to understand our follower readiness, I hope you can understand that whole idea by being able to identify basic leader behavior styles that correlate with subordinate levels of readiness. Again, if you have questions about this, please reach out to your primary instructor or advisor, get with a high-speed MS3, MS4, see if you can get those questions answered. If anything, depending on when you're watching this, you might be able to reach me. You can email me at any time. My email is silver.beatty, B-E-A-T-Y, at mso.umt.edu. Thanks for sitting through this lecture. I'm excited to talk more about leadership with you. So be on the lookout for the next video, and I'll see you there.